Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where over the weekend at the Toronto International Film Festival, Nate Parker's The Birth of a Nation passed its first awards test. I wouldn't say with flying colors, but certainly with a sigh of relief, not only for Fox Searchlight, but also, of course, everyone who is supporting this film, which, where the support, I'd have to say, has really taken on a life of its own, even beyond the movie. Before, was whether or not a movie that was brutally honest about slavery and depicted, a violent rebellion could do well with a mainstream audience. I think the question of whether or not it could do well with an awards audience seemed like, a no-brainer, that it would be, a major player. But now it's taken on a new narrative or a parallel narrative where the question is Nate Parker being unfairly persecuted for his past? An allegation made by a white woman back when he was in college, which some people say he has been cleared of, and some people feel he, wiggled his way out of it in quite an unsympathetic fashion. So, of course, there's been a real question mark as to whether or not the movie can move forward and can escape the shadow of the Nate Parker narrative, if he's become a Mel Gibson figure almost. And interestingly enough, he and Mel Gibson are crossing paths quite a bit at all these festivals as Mel Gibson takes around Hacksaw Ridge. But the test that I'm talking about was whether or not people could just look at the movie, and that seems to have been the case when it screened at the Toronto International Film Festival over the weekend. It got a standing ovation, and nobody questioned Nate Parker about the rape allegation in his past, the whole rape situation and rape conviction for his co-writer. That was eventually overturned because it was, his co-writer appealed that court decision, and the woman chose not to go back to court. Some would say because she didn't have a case, and some would say because she was being harassed and didn't want to go through it again. So it's a complicated situation, but the fact that people allowed the film to stand on its own and didn't bring that up, I think, is two things. One, it's a testament to Fox Searchlight and their ability to handle the event and to make sure that it went well and to really, craft it and to make sure that they had friendly press there, etc. Get everybody on the same page. That's very, very commendable. And two, that people are willing to play ball and go along with this. And I would actually say, as I've said before, I think Mel Gibson is a part of that decision, because people feel if they're going to give Hacksaw Ridge a fair shot, how can you not do the same for The Birth of a Nation, right? I mean, I don't think that Nate Parker or Mel Gibson wants to be associated with the other one, but they're actually helping each other out quite a bit. Now, I think that this means that the film will continue to, be respected, and people will, review it and discuss it in a polite manner when it comes to award season. But it still doesn't necessarily speak to what's going to happen to it in terms of nominations and wins. I think that it will probably do very well at the Golden Globes, because the Hollywood Foreign Press Association does not need that kind of negative publicity that I think a lot of Nate Parker supporters would put on it, that they weren't being fair to the movie. They might do a compromise where they give it a bunch of nominations and it doesn't get very many wins, if any. But the real question will come when you start having the guild nominations like SAG, DGA, and also the Oscars, of course, with the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, because there's anonymity coming into play. People can vote and nobody has any idea what they voted for. And if it were to come up in casual conversation, they can say, well, I voted for it, but clearly other people didn't, no matter what their actual vote was. With anonymity, you can push it off on the group and say, well, clearly there weren't enough votes for that movie to come into play. Now, I still feel that The Birth of a Nation overall, the compromise is going to be that it will be a heavily nominated film, but it will not win probably any major awards. It might win a smaller award, like let's say cinematography or costume design or set design or something like that. An award they don't have to give Nate Parker, basically. That's maybe the compromise you might see. They'll award the film because they want to, be respectful of the story that it tells, the movement that's going on. Look what's happening in the NFL with the national anthem. So they want to probably talk, be respectful of that, and also to be respectful of the hard work that everybody else on the film put into it, but while at the same time not necessarily rewarding Nate Parker. So at this point, that would be my prediction, but I think that the movie is still obviously in play. It's not DOA, and that's very encouraging for Fox Searchlight. And also, again, a testament to Fox Searchlight's ability to navigate the political waters of the awards season, and why Nate Parker was so right to go with them in the first place. Because, of course, he had a more lucrative deal on the table from Netflix, but felt Fox Searchlight was a better campaigner, and he was correct. So I'm curious, what do you think? And also, if that were to what came to pass, that The Birth of a Nation gets lots of nominations, but Nate Parker doesn't get a win, which would mean no Best Picture, no Best Actor, no Best Director, no Best Screenplay, because he, of course, would take the stage for any one of those. How would you feel about that? Would you feel that that was a good compromise, or would you be upset about it? All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second, and also I'd be curious to see, I think that all of his other projects that he has, he signed a lot of deals after The Birth of a Nation made such a splash at Sundance and was the biggest, the highest amount anyone ever paid to acquire the distribution rights to a film in the history of the Sundance Film Festival. He signed a lot of deals for other movies, but we haven't heard anything about them going forward. And I bet all of those movies are waiting to see how The Birth of a Nation plays out during awards season. So there's a lot riding on this, most of all, I think, for Nate Parker. All right, so the second story of the day is it was announced late last week that Billy Crudup has been cast as the Flash's dad. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is, that Hollywood has always been and always will be a business of connections. And Billy Crudup has two connections to the Flash. He, of course, was in the Watchmen movie for Zack Snyder, and Zack Snyder continues to cast a very strong shadow on the DCEU with his casting decisions. Joe Manganiello just being cast as Deathstroke, that's got Zack Snyder written all over it. As many of you told me, late last week and pointed out to me through some interviews that Zack Snyder had given, Joe Manganiello was his only other choice for Superman besides Henry Cavill. So I guess he's been wanting to make that up to him for quite some time. Debt repaid, I think, with the Deathstroke role. But, at the expense of the DCEU, we'll see. And Billy Crudup, of course, was in Watchmen as Dr. Manhattan, and so he's being cast here now. So as I said, because Zack Snyder wouldn't speak for the Wall Street Journal interview that Jeff Johns gave, he wouldn't give a quote, which I felt was very telling and, quite a slap in the face to Jeff Johns, not willing to play politics there. Everything boils down to politics. I feel that, Zack Snyder might not be slated to be part of the DCEU for much longer. But his shadow shall stay, as he is, again, really making, really laying down roots with these casting decisions. Also, Billy Crudup was already in a movie with Ezra Miller, who, of course, is the new Flash, the Stanford Prison Experiment. So that's two connections to the Flash, to the DCEU. And if he's being cast now, that says to me he's probably going to show up somewhere in the Justice League movie, because they have lots of, they're hitting the ground running, appropriate with the Flash, and so apparently I think they're gonna, do a little bit of foreshadowing of what's going on with Barry Allen and the DCEU before we actually get to his standalone movie. Now, what's happening? Well, for a while there were just regular parents to Barry Allen, right? They had died, they were gone. But when Jeff Johns came in and rewrote the character, I believe for Rebirth, he made a significant change to Barry Allen's past. And I think it's interesting that they seem to be going with that, because why else would you cast Billy Crudup in the role if you weren't going to go with this meaty backstory? And of course, it's something that Jeff Johns dreamed up. So I would also say with this news that for the DCEU going forward, expect Jeff Johns' creative choices to become canon in the DCEU. That's fine, I think, in some areas like The Flash, Green Lantern. People love his runs, Jeff Johns' runs there. I also really liked what he did with Batman and Earth 1. But I don't love all of Jeff Johns' creative choices, and I would hate to see him only push his own creative agenda instead of trying to step back and now realize that he is king of all of the DC characters, that he is the kingmaker, he is the one who decides everything, and he has to not play favoritism even when it comes to his own ideas. But anyway, Dr. Henry Allen, as reimagined by Jeff Johns, was arrested and convicted of the murder of Barry's mother and his Henry Allen's wife, Nora. So basically, Barry is traumatized. Ezra Miller's character is traumatized by not only the murder of his mother, but that his father was accused of the crime and died in jail for that crime. And that's what inspired Barry to go into CSI, criminal investigation, the one cold case that particularly haunts him. So I think that Ezra Miller, that would be interesting to see. He's coming across as like a tech nerd, someone who's very savvy, but he's clearly studying, criminal investigation in college. I think that would be a very interesting thing to explore. But I think they'll probably have flashback sequences with Billy Crudup, the crime scene. Zack Snyder does a nice job with the crime scene, as we all know, from the Watchmen opening credit sequence, and having that haunt Barry. And I'm sure when Bruce Wayne looks into him, and we see that Bruce Wayne is doing just that from the Comic-Con trailer, he'll see this was what motivates or partially motivates Barry. I think it's interesting. I think Billy Crudup makes a good dad for Ezra Miller. I think that's good character motivation. I think it's a good idea. So far so good. But we'll see. I have no problem with casting Billy Crudup. I don't think he's a particularly amazing actor. I think he's a solid actor. But we will see. I think it's just very indicative of what you're going to see coming forward in the DCEU. Zack Snyder casting decisions, Jeff Johns creative decisions for the characters based on what he wrote. All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is that G.I. Joe 3 is something that Paramount does want to move forward with, but according to Byung-hun Lee, who's doing press right now for The Magnificent Seven, it's not getting very good reviews. I'll be seeing it later this week. But the G.I. Joe 3 is in a holding pattern while everyone's schedule is tries to be nailed down. He said, in particular, Dwayne Johnson, who we know is very, very busy. But I would wonder if it was not only Dwayne Johnson's schedule that needs to be nailed down, but whatever his salary would be for the new film and the size of his role. When Dwayne Johnson did the second G.I. Joe, his first, his career was still trying to, make a comeback. He had made a big splash at first with the Scorpion King, but then he kind of got stuck in these kiddie movies and he wasn't particularly doing very well. And he was making like these, B-level revenge picks that also nobody was seeing. He wasn't the San Andreas Dwayne Johnson that we all know so well today, who has a full slate. So I don't know if he'd even want to return to the G.I. Joe movies, considering their reputation. So it would probably take a pretty penny and probably also some creative input, which he apparently is now able to do on all the movies he's involved in. As I said with the DC Rumors video I made recently, that he's intimately involved in the development of the Shazam film, even though he's not playing Shazam, he's playing Black Adam. So I don't know if he'd want to, and also he's so busy, why would he return? And now here's my question. Why does G.I. Joe need Dwayne Johnson? I don't think that they do. He's very busy. I think that he's in the danger of being oversaturated as it is. And I think that G.I. Joe really needs to redefine itself anyway. It should really do a reboot. Now, I do like Byung-hun Lee. I do like Ray Park. They play the two coolest ninjas in the movie, and so I think the real reason that anybody goes to see those films. And I would reboot it and maybe go a little darker and grittier. And just last week with Headshot, although Headshot not getting the best reviews coming out of the Toronto Film Festival, unfortunately, but Iko Uwais and Gareth Evans from The Raid, why not approach them to take over the G.I. Joe franchise? Put Iko Uwais, say, hey, you don't have to wear full body mask or something. We're going to put you in a leading role, along with Ray Park and Byung-hun Lee's characters. I'd probably keep them even though I was largely rebooting it. Maybe I'd do a soft reboot. But I would think that would be an interesting direction to go into. I'd be very excited about that. And those guys, the Raid guys, need an opportunity. They need a big Hollywood opportunity. And G.I. Joe is in need of an outside of the box kind of move like that to aggressively rebrand the property. So I'm curious, what do you think of that idea? And also, if you were G.I. Joe, the G.I. Joe team, at Paramount, or if you were Dwayne Johnson, what would you want to do with, them reteaming? Do you think that the G.I. Joe franchise needs Dwayne Johnson? And do you think that Dwayne Johnson needs the G.I. Joe franchise? What would you advise from each perspective? All right, so let's get to the viewer question of the day. This comes from BTT viewer Lewis Poole. Hello, Lewis. And Lewis had a lot of exclamation mark emojis, and he said, question. Hi, Grace. Hopefully I got your attention. You did. I am from Scotland, the UK, and I'm the biggest Marvel fan. Okay, so even though I enjoy both Marvel and DC, Suicide Squad is my favorite with the UK spelling. I love it. DC movie behind the Dark Knight. So Lewis is like a moderate. Very nice, Lewis. So Lewis says, anyway, I really like superhero movies either way, and most of these movies have really big budgets. I was wondering how studios spend their money on the movies. How much goes into salaries, how much goes into advertising, etc., etc. Thanks, Grace. Love your videos, and greetings from Scotland. Great question, Lewis, and it's a good example just for us to do a little bit of a refresher on blockbuster budgets, especially as I discussed last week, Mel Gibson was saying they were too big. And then it also admitted in the same conversation that he had no experience with green screen or visual effects, so obviously couldn't really comment on it, had no authority to comment on it. But anyway, let's talk about movie budgets. Now, a lot of the times for comic book movies, they do require an inordinate amount of VFX. So a lot of the money does go toward having to build these enormous sets, the VFX team, they have to hire multiple VFX houses to get the movies done in time. I mean, just go look at the recent Civil War Blu-ray extras. They do a wonderful job showing how some of the digital effects are done, and they're really detailed and very convincing. So you can see there's a lot of work put into that. And if you don't want to have a sausage party situation where you harass your CGI people into working overtime without the appropriate pay, you have to pay them quite a bit. That's why those people were abused in Canada on the Sausage Party animation team, because it's so expensive. So that's where a lot of the money goes. Now, sometimes, of course, with salaries, you'll have a big player like Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, or Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, a big name actor. And that person either right away, if they're a big name like Robert Downey Jr., or when their contract comes up for renewal and they've really got you because you need them as the face of your franchise, they get quite a bit of money. They get about 20 to 30 million up front, and then they get another 20 to 30 million, sometimes even more. Sometimes, actually, I believe with both those gentlemen, 50 to 60 million actually in back-end participation. But that's not part of the budget of the film. So Robert Downey Jr. would make, let's say, 20 to 30 million up front for an Iron Man movie, let's say Iron Man 3. I think actually one of the Avengers even. And then he gets another 50 million in back-end participation. Harrison Ford gets about 20 to 30 million to be in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And then, as I recall from some headline reports, made 60 million off of the back end of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And those back-end deals are often not of profit, but of gross, the overall box office gross, because they know how Hollywood accounting works. So anyway, that's salaries for big stars. But that's one of the reasons you're seeing such small actors, in terms of stature, be put on these projects. One of the reasons they probably didn't want to hire Charlize Theron or Emily Blunt for Captain Marvel is because both of those women would be very expensive and could probably ask for very large back-end deals. Brie Larson, never having been in a major blockbuster film ever, she has King Kong, Kong Skull Island coming up, but of course nobody knows how that's going to perform, and it's an ensemble cast. She can't ask for a lot of money up front. She can get probably a nice sum because of her Oscar win, but she's considered to be considerably cheaper, and I'm sure couldn't really ask for any back end, whereas I think Charlize Theron after Mad Max Fury Road certainly could. So you get someone like Brie Larson, Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, they're very cheap. Elizabeth Olsen, Tom Hiddleston, you not only get them cheap, but you sign them for a multi-picture deal with the salary increases built in. I think after Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson is the next highest paid actor, because she's also, I think, the biggest name outside of the MCU in terms of, especially after Lucy, like when her contract comes up for renegotiation, they'll have to pay her considerably more if they want to keep her. But then sometimes Jennifer Lawrence, for instance, in the Hunger Games franchise, even though she signed a multi-picture deal when she didn't have a lot of leverage, her team decided to say, you know what, we're not going to honor this deal. She's not going to show up to shoot unless you renegotiate. And that Lionsgate was forced to do so because they would lose more money in the waiting to shoot and having the film not hit its release date than just deciding to pay her the extra money that she wanted and that she and her team were demanding. So she effectively held that franchise ransom, and Lionsgate paid. So that's different ways. So that's the way the Hollywood can keep the budget down sometimes with salaries, but sometimes how actors can get around it. But in her case, she was the only one. She's the biggest star. You can't make the Hunger Games movies without her. The MCU has a little more leverage because they have such a large cast of popular characters. They can always just not use you, right? Like no one complained that Thor and Hulk sat out Captain America Civil War, right? So that's very good way to really show Mark Ruffalo and Chris Hemsworth where they stand in terms of negotiation power. Although let's see how Thor Ragnarok does. It's like a chess game. You have to see what you can deliver at the box office, and then you can maybe open up the discussion again with new information. However, in terms of advertising, I wanted to point out that is never included in the budget of a film that you see listed. And for a major blockbuster, it costs anywhere from $100 to $200 million in terms of how much they spend on advertising. That's a global advertising campaign. It's very expensive. Even something like Don't Breathe costs about $20 to $30 million to advertise. And that's a small ad campaign. So that gives you an idea of how much it costs to advertise a film. And again, that's not in the budget. Then also budgets, don't forget, they include not only the people you see on screen salaries, but everybody who's not on screen, from the director to the assistant director to the costume designer to all the PAs to the people who work for this, partly sometimes it's built into them, like Kevin Feige would get a fee, etc. So there's a lot of people who work on these things. They're huge juggernauts, and that's another reason their budgets are so big. It takes a village to make a superhero movie, and the village needs to get paid. All right, so and they offset this cost often not only with the box office, and as people have pointed out, with merchandising and streaming and all those things, and also they sell quite a bit. They get their money back from foreign distribution rights, the rights to distribute the film in other countries, so they make their money back that way. They also make their money from selling it to air on television. Something like Starz will pay a lot of money. Epix will pay a lot of money to be able to air these films first. And then also, of course, when they license the characters to, like, Dr. Pepper, Batman v Superman, all those characters were on cans of Dr. Pepper, and Dr. Pepper had to pay for that. And so, although sometimes and sometimes also when you see product placement in a movie, that also is that company is paying for that product placement. So that's how they offset the budget sometimes. So it can be done. Hollywood's pretty good at this. I think their big problem still always seems to be quality of the actual film with the screenwriting. But anyway, that's today's morning movie news. I hope that cleared that up for you a little bit, Lewis. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, Lewis's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching, and you can check out some more videos right now.